called the Roundtable Conversations, when partnership and collaborations are needed. And we have at the beginning, I was afraid that there will be more people sitting on this side of the room than on that side of the room, but obviously that there is a quite a good group. So my name is Lubo, and I will help to facilitate our conversations. So, and I think it will be good if each from the friends here will introduce himself. It will have like, sorry?
Himself, it's all men. How did that?
The first question is already here. So you know that I like the importance of asking questions together. So here is the question. I don't know is my answer. I really don't know. So my name is Lubo, and I am working with a global team. And in the past, I worked as a pastor, but also I was leading a few organizations, and my passion is working with the leaders. So and I'm happy if others are involved and moving forward. So my role is more support and sometimes the mentoring, which I like more than the technical term coaching. So that's me. And here is my friend Oleg. So can you say a few words about you?
Hello everyone, my name is Oleg Shelashkiy. I work with Ukraine Without Orphans. I was leading this movement for the last 5 years. This year we are transitioning to a new president, and also I direct a capacity building organization called International Leadership and Development Center.
Hello, I'm Lyall Hallick. I'm from Winnipeg, Canada, and it's a pleasure to be part of this panel. I am a retiree, and in my retirement, I've had the opportunity to come alongside an organization called LAM International and Global Capacity Building Network, and along with my wife, we've been able to travel around several countries in the world to provide training and support. Our role is not direct service delivery per se, but what we do is we come alongside to offer training to equip the saints so that they, within their own nations and with their own cultural context, can in fact develop services and supports that meet the needs of orphans in their communities.
Hi, my name is Gordon Showell-Rogers, and I've been partnering and collaborating all my life.
Wow. That's a long time.
I also, yeah, thank you very much. I'm from the United Kingdom, which could do with some help in partnering and collaborating.
Quite a lot, I think.
Yeah.
So I would echo that. I'm Alan, also from the UK, also in need of assistance around partnering and collaboration. I'd just like to point out I'm in the middle of the non-bearded half of the panel.
Oh, yeah.
Not quite sure how that's happened, but anyway. I've been passionate about partnering and collaboration, I think, for as long as I've been in ministry, just to recognize that the scale of what we see far outstrips anything that you or I can address. But we come together as co-participants, if you like, in God's kingdom. We are following the one who calls, and he has all the resources that we need. And so as we look around, so we begin to discover those answers. And so for me, I found some of those answers through a partnering community called the Global Children's Forum, which was wrestling with the question of how can we respond to the scale of need that we see, and what might we be able to do together that we can't do alone. And I've been involved in the UK as well in a variety of ministries, but for the last decade or so, supporting the most vulnerable children in the UK through Home for Good.
My name is Jess Curabo. I'm from the Philippines. My involvement with World Without Orphans started way back in November 2009 in New York City at the first 414 Window Global Summit, and that's where I first met Ruslan Malyuta, and the friendship and the relationship grew. And now it's not just World Without Orphans, it's all of these countries without orphans. And in the Philippines, I'm one of the advocates and champions helping Robbie de Luzuriaga, get the movement engaged and connected and strengthened as we collaborate with government, with civil society, with NGOs, especially with the church.
Thank you. And I think that I hope the part of the answer to Gordon's question, I hope that this will be a session of learning community. So we have some comments and experiences and answers, but so do you, and we would love to share with you a few insights, but feel free just to add yours and to ask questions. We don't have, unfortunately, the timers. That's really helpful tool. Everybody. Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Gordon. That's not so frightening as this visible, That's, so just to have a visual timer on the table, you don't even need to use it, and you know that you need to think what you are going to say, So I think I consider it as an important and great thing and success already that the 4 parts of our focus, World Without Orphans focus, we are able to communicate in a different forms during this global forum. The intervention, prevention, collaboration, and living refreshed or self-care. And I'm just saying to myself that if people will not take more, just to be aware of these 4 elements, will help them to move in more meaningful and efficient way forward. And I'm saying this with emphasis on collaboration and self-care, because that and at many conferences you have a section about collaboration, and you have also a seminar or 2 about the self-care, but we somehow feel that it shouldn't be just a section. It should be part of the main emphasis. And it need to be emphasized to the degree that it's almost like, and I'm struggling with the right English word, like inseparable. Can you help me to say it the right way? Yeah? From the other things. So if someone is just emphasizing the intervention, we should learn humbly, accept. It's almost like part of the learning community in itself. We should be humbly willing to accept, yes, your emphasis is important, but please let's have a conversation about the role of collaboration, of prevention, and self-care in our overall focus, Gordon. That's the Gordon I know, that always trying to serve. So thank you for bringing this. But I think we need it as well as the people there.
Shall I turn over now?
No, give me grace. No, I'm not. And so what we are going to talk and to share about, please remember that it is in the context of World Without Orphans vision. Because the one thing I somehow, I'm personally sometimes feeling like frustrated about, if certain important issues are taken out of the context and are presenting only as a technical terms. There is a technicality in collaboration, but there is no meaningful collaboration if there is not a bigger context, and if there is not a mission, if there is not a purpose, if there is not a vision for collaboration. So we cannot separate it. And I believe also there are universal principles for collaboration, but there are specifics for individual environments. So that's what I would like to say at the beginning. And I had a very interesting experience in Zambia a few months ago, and I helped as a consultant, I say as a WWO consultant, to help to set the roundtable for Zambia Without Orphans as initial step. And actually it was not the first step, because the partners there in Zambia, they already had the conversations between churches and government, NGOs and the government, and between church and the NGOs as well. But somehow they came to the point to realize we would like to create a collaborative effort and bring all those together, not for conference to tell them what they need to do, but to ask questions together. And when we were working on preparation, the Carrie Ambrester, one of the the key people behind the idea, we need to see this in Zambia, she said to me, "Oh, and you will speak there as an expert." And I said to her, "Carrie, I'm not the expert. I'm not." But she said to me this. She said to me, "Well, you helped to organize this in Lithuania. You helped to organize the Roundtable in the Central Asia. You helped to organize it in Sri Lanka. Maybe you're expert." And I say to myself, maybe I am, but I realize that the word expert can have a lot of different meanings. I don't feel myself an expert. I feel as a person who is willing to share my own experience, and especially with people who are mature enough to realize that it is my experience. And then you need to contextualize it in your context. If I will meet the person who is expecting me to tell him or her how to do these things in your country, I will pull back myself intuitively. I will be frightened because I will be afraid that we will cause more damage than the help, So that's what I would like to say at the beginning. And you noticed that with Alan we had our little interaction yesterday during the morning session, and Alan answered the question why collaboration. And but I would like to ask again everybody here the same question or similar question. So I have my question here. When partnership and collaboration are needed and why in the area of care and ministry to orphans and vulnerable children? Your insight and comments.
Do we need these now?
I will.
Let me
do we need it?
Give it to you, Lubo, and you can decide. Let me put one here.
Well, in talking, I don't know, it's hard to answer when I need it. If we talk about movement development, for example, the word or concept of movement means that there is more than one person or one entity. So if you want to build a movement, you need to have more than you alone. So you have to bring others together and collaborate somehow. Then when we talk about orphans and vulnerable children's challenge in the country, no one alone can solve this problem on any level. There is a lot of stakeholders, a lot of different government agencies, non-profits, churches. So if you try to be the one-man show and try to be superhero who fixes everything, probably you will not succeed. But that's why if you want to do this work on national, regional, local level, if you want to build a movement or try to solve the bigger picture problems, you cannot do it without collaboration.
Thank you. I have no problem answering the question of when collaboration is required, because the answer is always. When I was first posed to this question, I began to think and try to, clarify my thoughts. But collaboration and partnership is inevitably required in both the development of social services and its subsequent delivery, if the services are to be effective and sustainable. Not only is partnership and collaboration required, but it is highly desirable. It is needed to accurately assess the needs of an individual, of an organization, and of a community. It is required to establish common interests and values. It is required to develop meaningful priorities. It is required to implement effective plans and strategies for service delivery. It is required to determine resources needed, whether those are human or financial, and to effectively steward these resources in an accountable fashion. It is also required in order to develop supportive policies and procedures, regulations, and legislations to govern organizations and society in general. As to the why, first of all, my wife told me so. An expression that she has in training is, none of us is as smart as all of us. Each of us may have some ideas, but if we collaborate and work in partnership, we bring into the discussion the ideas and the experience of many individuals. And the last and perhaps more important one is that God told me so. To put this in a bit of a biblical perspective, in Romans 12 and 4, where we find scripture which reminds us, although we are one body in Christ, we have many members, and each of the members does not have the same function or gifts. And we need to use the gifts and the members of Christ's body to come together in order to be effective in our delivery of service.
How many of us really believe that we are designed to operate alone? We're just not designed that way. We are social creatures. In the mercy of God, God has placed many of us in families, and we're longing that others would be placed in families. We are simply not designed to operate alone. And so it's not the why question. We could list a whole series of reasons about greater impact and all that, which we had yesterday morning. But it goes to the very heart of our being, who we are and who we are designed to be. We are not designed to operate alone.
Thanks, Gordon. Yeah, I would echo that. That we find our sense of identity, don't we, in our serving together and the fit of being part of this global body of Christ. And that, for me, is a remarkable thing of the true sense of who God calls us to be and the discovery of what he can do in us and through us as we offer what we have. For me, it was illustrated just very briefly. I don't know if you spotted, as Robbie was sharing in the general session earlier, there was one little verse that referenced in John 6. Did you spot that? And we kind of moved past quickly, but just that incredible glimpse that we capture in that story where Jesus is there with the crowd in front of him, and he says, well, let's feed them. Who can respond to that? And everybody had to play their part. So there was a lot of hungry people that day, and the disciples were struggling to find the way forward, and one little boy brought what he had. And in a sense, that for me is the wonderful illustration of what God can do when we bring the little that we have and we're willing to surrender that and to then let him incorporate us into what he is doing. Many are fed and many are blessed as a result.
Why collaboration? Because working together, we can accomplish more. In the context of the culture of the Philippines, we need for our countrymen to see the church united, to see those of us who have a heart for orphans working together, for them to see unity within the body of Christ. And for us, when we came together, we agree whenever we have a meeting, whenever we have a conversation, that we leave our logos and our egos outside the door. And we sit down together and we figure out how can we accomplish more by looking at the scriptures as our foundation to work together as a team. And in our experience, one of the things that we've realized at the very beginning is that for us to come together in collaboration, we need to break down all the barriers that separate us. Denominational barriers, social barriers, the barriers between civil society and government, and all the other barriers that keep us from having a clear, heartfelt conversation that allows us to arrive at solutions that will work. And that we do not bring any agenda. Like if you're, the default is when you're looking for a partner is what can this partner do for me? How can I leverage this relationship that will benefit, what I'm trying to do? But we have discovered that we leave all of that behind and we think, what can we do together? When we collaborate as a bigger body, as a united, in a united effort, what can we accomplish so that the watching world and the people that are waiting for, a reason and a purpose to participate can be encouraged and say, hey, we want to join you because you're together. You have one agenda, you're in agreement. And one final thing, when we come in, I do not have the answers. I am not the expert. And I will, at the very outset, affirm what people are already doing. Like if I talk to the pastor, say, Pastor, I want to support and I want to validate what you are already doing. I am not bringing in new solutions, a new way, but together, maybe we can figure out in collaboration a better way that will help us to succeed.
The personal comment or insight I found out helpful a few years ago, and somehow it's influencing my work, is that if we are thinking about work and ministry, we are thinking so often about efficiency. And when we are thinking about efficiency, we are talking about practical actions. And not necessarily with the same intensity when we are thinking about collaboration, we are thinking about the spiritual and relational element. And like for me, it was very helpful when a few years ago, when I was reading the book of Acts chapter 6 and the story of the widows and, the taking care for the widows and the kind of relational tension, as you know in the story, because of the practical need and the organizational challenges in distributing the practical need. So to my surprise, I noticed that there was a relational tension because of the practical need. And so I start to follow the story, and I realized that the leaders of the church, they were trying to find solution for practical need. And of course, the practical solution was needed, but they didn't it was not a shortcut they did. They were looking for a practical solution with deep spiritual element. When they were in the process of finding out who may serve, they were not looking like for people with great management skills. They were looking for people of the spirit and the faith. And so somehow I realized that relational element and the practical element and the spiritual element need to be involved, all three of them, in the process of collaboration and responding to the need, and especially when the things are growing and when we are realizing that the God, as people say, I'm struggling with that term, the God is on the move. God is always on the move, Sometimes people say we see God on the move on something. He's always on, but especially when we as a people, we see that really there is a God movement growing, and God is really somehow intentionally focusing his light more on one specific area because it's important as expression of the gospel, and care for children and vulnerable is. I think we will agree on that. That I think that then all three elements need somehow to be involved. And you may think yourself about the situations or organizations or even collaborations where one of those areas started to play dominant role and two were neglected. I came across two groups of people where they say, we have such a good relationship that when I'm going to the meeting, I already know when I have idea, I feel like I would like to share, what will be the response of my friend, and I will know that my idea will create the tension for our relationship. So I decided rather to pull idea back and just to keep relationship. And at the beginning I was thinking, what an honorable approach, but then I say to myself, isn't it not part of our mission to really move forward, to take practical action, and to keep relational part and spiritual part and practical part, to all three play a role, to be involved in our collaboration. Sometimes we need to work more and be more intentional on the relational part and to spend time together. Sometimes we need to be, and to our surprise, it's even in the Christian circles, like a prayer time together. It can become just a part of agenda, People meet and say, oh, we are a Christian group. In recognition of our Christianity, we just start our meeting with a prayer. But that's a very different approach than when you realize that prayer is essential for your partnership. that coming together to partner, and in order to see really God's involvement and our part doing well, the prayer need to be essential. So we may intentionally do kind of the internal audit for our collaborations in these three areas and ask ourselves, do we remember this one, the practical, do we remember the spiritual element, and are we keeping also the relational part in place? Are we also, is it important for me also, what is my relationship with brother, or is it important for me only if we will do the work and I will just, there is probably in English the phrase that I will just swallow my, you know, my anger and it will still be there, you know. So can you, before we will move forward, can you comment on these three dynamics and your comment from your experience, your area, from your cultural context about these three dynamics in collaboration?
Well, this is basically like what Lubo was just talking about. It's more like formal and informal parts in collaboration. And for me personally, I like social parts, spending time together, building relationship. And it's easier for me to work with people I have good relationship with. But sometimes that's not the choice. You have to work with people you don't have relationship. So. Like I'm a more task-oriented person, so for me, it's hard just to accept collaboration for the sake of collaboration. I see the need in collaboration when we try to achieve some common goal, and like our brother said, like it's good if like we come with no agenda, but unfortunately, when you bring people for collaboration, everybody comes with some expectations or agenda, either open or hidden. So when you want people to collaborate, basically what you ask from them is to invest their time, their resources into the common kind of work, basically. And each one of them, like, and in collaboration, you have people with different kind of width of thinking. And for me, it's the person who has the widest thinking and widest picture scale is the person who will drive collaboration. So if I have very narrow thinking and understanding, and I bring people for collaboration who have much wider thinking and understanding of the problem, it will be very hard for me to set the agenda for collaboration, because they will see this in much bigger scale. So so in order to kind of initiate collaboration, we need to build relationship, but it's also important if we would like to kind of start this collaboration, initiate it, and we want to move to some common vision or common goal, we need to bring enough like picture that is bigger than people have already, so that they would want to leave their agenda behind and invest for the common vision and common picture. So this is, so like for me, it's like when we talk about developing a movement, when we try to work with people, we need to come with something bigger than people already have. Otherwise, it's very hard to persuade them that we need to collaborate, but then when they feel that they, it's not doing anything for them, but they can do more without collaboration. So when you present this vision that's bigger than themselves, than anyone in the room, when you present the kind of picture, the problem, and then people begin to understand that only combining their efforts and resources, they can solve this problem or they can achieve this goal, then it will really help collaboration.
I don't think there's any doubt that development of relationships is critical in the partnership process, and certainly I would echo the comments earlier about a common vision. You know, without a common vision, the people perish. And so if you can develop that common vision, I think it tends to break down the doors. I love that expression, leave your egos and your logos at the door, because I think that's part of the issue in the travels that we have done, where we see there's a little bit of protectionism. This is my funding agency, this is my community, and you know, I've got some information, but I'm not sure if I want to share this because perhaps someone else would take my idea and run with it, rather than sort of seeing that broad-based common vision where everybody can unite around a specific goal and around a specific task. in working on sort of non-governmental, or working rather on governmental projects in a secular environment, you can do a lot of team building exercises. But generally speaking, teams do not come together until they have a common focus. And then once they see that common focus and actually start sitting down and going elbow to elbow and trying to tackle that focus, do you really see the level of partnership come together in a meaningful fashion?
Just to try and build on some of the things that have been said, I think in that Act 6 example, which I quote you a lot on that, Lubo, it's really helpful, those three thoughts. It began, there's an element of cultural tension in there as well. And that reminds me that I think it's really important to emphasize again and again that grassroots solutions are needed. So you need Zambian solutions to Zambian problems. You need Filipino solutions to Filipino problems. You need UK solutions to UK problems, but we'd be here all day if we begin that. So grassroots solutions are critical in that, and that cultural tension in Act 6 reminds us of that. On those three, the breakdown, I love that breakdown. I've been slightly troubled by these numbers. They're not consecutive. But does it matter? Because the wall has been built. Does it really matter if it's a bit untidy? So clearly it was designed to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But does it matter? It's practically resolved. And sometimes we have to accept resolutions which are not exactly the ones we would accept. On the relational side, I have some of us, Brian and I have a friend who is a Congolese, he's a pastor, he's a Congolese refugee pastor, going through some very, very tough times. He taught me within the last couple of years that he said in Europe, you have this expression from René Descartes, the French philosopher, I think, therefore I am, cogito ergo sum. You are because you think. In many of our African cultures, my friend says, we are because we belong. We are because we belong. So community and relationship is central to our being. And spiritually, I think we just need to keep reminding ourselves that we are not, this is not our idea. It's not our kingdom. It's not our church. This is the church of the Lord Jesus Christ. This is the kingdom of God. These ideas that we're talking about are his heart and his mind. And just to build on your point about the bigger picture, Oleg and Jess, your point about beginning with what we already have, what's already being done. Sometimes we can convene people and ask what is already being done, but then ask ourselves, what greater things could we achieve together? So not just the collective part, sum of the parts, but some greater vision above and beyond what happens if we just put the jigsaw pieces together. And I've been very helped. Susan Hillis of the World Without Orphans team introduced us to something called the Collective Impact Investment Framework. It's a model for collective impact. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that. Some of you know about that? It's from Stanford University. It's very, very helpful. It suggests that there are 5 elements for effective collective impact. And I always forget one of them. One of them is a shared vision. One of them is agreed shared measurables. One of them is a clear and effective communication. One of them is some kind of backbone structure, some kind of organization. So like with Ukraine Without Orphans, you have an organizational framework. World Without Orphans, there is an organizational framework. I can't remember the 5th. Can you remember, Lubo? Can you remember, Brian? Have you got it there? Anyway, it's the collective impact investment framework model, and we can get that to you. And some of us are having a wider conversation about family, strengthening families globally. using that collective impact framework. So World Without Orphans and a number of other movements, Global Children's Forum, are part of that conversation. And we are asking ourselves in that conversation, we have a common vision for healthy families, for the sake of children and youth, for the sake of the next generation. We want to try to find ways of strengthening and building healthier families. We have a common vision for that. Let's see if we can find some shared measurables. We have some ideas that we're beginning to explore around that. Sorry.
Not at all. Lots of stuff. I just want to echo all that's been said. I want to give you one illustration, actually, that I've found helpful, particularly around the sense of where we convene and we gather together around a shared vision. And this was something somebody shared with me a little while ago about the difference, bear with me on this, the difference between Australian and British farming. So in the UK, we are limited on space. And for our cattle or sheep or whatever we are looking after, we put it in a field and make sure it is safe within that space. So it'll be a hedge or a fence or something to keep it in. So that's more organizational, is that you put boundaries around what it is you're trying to protect and safeguard. In Australia, from my understanding, not being an Australian, but having Australian friends, the importance for cattle farming in Australia is the source of nourishment, of water. So you dig a well, and the cattle will roam for miles, but they will always be drawn to that well. And so for me, that is the comparison and the difference, that here in collaboration, we are drawn together to that shared well from which we draw. So our relational sharing and our spiritual source are reflected in that, in terms of coming together to pursue that together. But I found, as a visual learner, for me, that was just helpful in a reminder that there will be times and occasions for where we bound things in. That leans more to the organizational. But as we seek to collaborate together, let's be clear on what is that source that we are pursuing together, the shared vision, and then in particular, the understanding of how we work together in order that we come with our clean sheet and we bring what we have, and then we start to see what God will do with that.
Yes, the shared vision and how we work together. In our experience, we have discovered that there are many levels to collaboration. Some go deep, some are shallow, some are just introductions to future collaborations. Because some collaborations do not happen on day one, not even in a year, probably happen in 2 years because the relationship has to mature. And people need to build trust and confidence. And people, like in our context, there are people who are threatened by this new idea. You know what, in the beginning, they had the misconception that for you to be a part of WWO, for you to support and advocate WWO, you had to adopt. That people had that mistaken, like I am not ready for adoption. And so we had to make it clear, no. We are not asking everyone in the local church or in the body of Christ to consider adopting, because some people just can't do that. They're not equipped to adopt. And so we had to identify, who do we collaborate with? Who are the people, who are the organizations that are ready, that the Lord has already guided and brought to our door so that collaboration can begin. And even when collaboration began, we realized that, again, there's levels. There's partners where collaboration happens very naturally. It just flows. There's those where there's effort and time, and there's tension, there's confusion, there's misunderstanding. I mean, our personalities get in the way. Our organizations get in the way. Our boards get in the way. Laws get in the way. And so as we look at the broad picture of collaboration, I think it is an understanding that we are different, but we need that shared vision, and we need to find that the common ground where we can come to an agreement so that we all own what it is that we're trying to accomplish.
Part of the title for our session is, if I'm correct, initial steps. Am I right? No. When collaboration is needed, maybe it's part of our subtitle. What initial steps we may take, and I already mentioned, and probably for some of you it may be even boring to hear me to say this again, but I cannot just not mention it again. The importance of of questions, and I don't mean again the question as questions, but the questions which are at the core of what we would like to achieve, at the core of what is cause we are coming together. And I don't know if this is just my observation, so it'll be good to hear from the panelists, but my impression is that when it comes to three key questions, I believe for making things happen, that's where we are, where we would like to be, and what is the next practical steps. The evangelical community, especially we as leaders, we have a tendency to focus on the question number 2, where we would like to be. And we like quite often to escape or to leave behind the question, so where we are now. But the common sense is saying that it's very hard to know, to reach your destination if your GPS is not locating your current position, because you may take the route from New York to the capital of my city, Prague, but you may be just 5 kilometers from Prague, So it's not really helpful to have information how to get to Prague from New York if you don't know that you are just few kilometers from the place. And somehow this question is, we have a tendency just to really to avoid these questions, where we are. And when I say where we are, I don't mean just our spiritual assessment. I mean inviting the specialist and identifying the areas and asking specific questions. So under the umbrella of questions, so where we are, there are specific areas, and then we may really have quite a deep conversations. Why I believe that this question is very important, because then naturally it will lead us to the third question: what will be the next step? What will be the next step? And so, for the roundtables we did in a few countries and regions, with focus to help to start the national initiative with WWO Vision, the questions played an important role. Yes, yeah, and that's a very good question. The way we approach that there is no way to arrange meaningful roundtable if you would like to do it from outside. Partners in the country who will take responsibility in forming facilitation team, they need to do that, and they are the ones who need to understand the importance of these three key simple questions. So where we are in our own country, what are our dreams for the situation of the children and vulnerable children and orphans, including legislation, including the church involvement, including the role of the NGOs, including our connection with the bigger global movement. And so if they will start themselves to ask these questions during the preparation, I found I'm giving you all my secrets, My closest coworker Carmen say, I need to come and to hear your secrets, I don't have any. I'm just the biggest part of the success of collaboration if it happened and when it happened is the journey towards with local partners to the place where they will meet together and ask these questions. Because before they will meet in one specific place, we are talking about these questions ourselves. And they own the questions. They don't have the answers, but they own the questions. They really honestly believe, I think, my experience is saying to me, that they believe it's important to ask where we are in our own country. And then they invite their own experts with the numbers, with the statistics, with the knowledge of laws and what is the government position on the foster care, adoption, and all the other things, and what is the situation of the of the institutionalized care in our country. They know. I don't. I can find information on the internet, but if they are inviting the local person, either from government or someone who really is focused on this area, and this local person is presenting where we really are, then it is really powerful. So the questions, from my perspective, it may, at the first place, it may sound as a kind of simple or simplified answer, but I don't really, I don't see it as easy, and that's my approach to many things. That I like the simple thing, but not simplified thing. I like the simple things with the depth. And so the questions, these three questions, during the preparation of Roundtable, we are working on the local partners. So, and they take, in the process, they take ownership. So when I or with my colleagues, when we come to the country, the questions they are modified, they are shaped, but at the core of their outcome, there is a question. So where we actually are, what we are dreaming about. So that's my attitude to it. But the question I have is that, from your experience, what can you share stories or comments? What do you see as a helpful initial steps in your context? How to start, how to engage people in the initial conversations when it comes to the collaboration? Because I guess that some people in the room here, they would like to know. So how we need to start this? What are the first steps? So what are your...
I'd be interested to hear from Oleg about how you mobilize the local church for this vision in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Well, and definitely, like, when we want people to receive the vision, they wouldn't receive the vision without understanding what the problem is. For example, when a lot of people in Ukraine believe orphanages are actually good, it's very hard to persuade them that children need to be in families. So you need to present the problem, you need to explain, help people to see the problem before you help them to receive the vision. So Ukraine Without Orphans started with understanding, with limited understanding of the problem, but in 2000, 10 years ago, basically, we saw that there is about 30,000 children in the orphanages who are adoptable, and about 30,000 local churches in Ukraine total. So we could see that it's really possible that one family from a church could take one child into their home, and we can have no children orphans in the orphanages. So this, those simple numbers helped us to see this kind of problem, the vision, and the solution at the same time, kind of roughly. And the other thing is that it's very important now when we work with our regional network or with local, we understand that it's important for everyone who works on this level to understand this statistics, understand what the problems are, because then we saw that there is actually more children in the orphans we didn't know about. They are not adoptable, they are not legal orphans, but they are also there, and they might be in a worse situation than the ones who are adoptable, but we just didn't understand it when we started. So now we talk a lot about prevention, family strengthening, reunification, and so talking about getting the church involved, it's also very helpful, what happens when we come to the church and meet with the pastor. Whenever you tell them at first that, well, we want the church to really serve children and families and orphans, every pastor says right away, yeah, but we do that. Our church is involved. We go to orphanages on Christmas, do performance, bring gifts, and bring food. And then you ask a pastor, okay, do you know how many orphans are in your community? Do you know how many vulnerable families, families at risk in your communities? And usually pastors don't know that. And they don't know anything about social situation. And sometimes our teams, the group teams from Ukraine Without Orphans, sometimes they come to these churches and help them, work with them, and right away the pastor says, I don't know how to find them. Say, okay, let's go, I'll show you. And they go to the community, the village, and they see the bad house without a fence. They go inside and, oh, this is the family you need to focus on. And then it turns out this family came to church before, but the church didn't pay attention to them. So it's just one of the cases. But basically, it helps when we help pastors to see the problem. A lot of people, we talked here, a lot of people from different countries, they complain that the government doesn't want to cooperate with the church. And what we learned is, it's not that the government doesn't want to cooperate with the church, it's that the church is not relevant to what the kind of needs are. The church usually comes to the government with religious agenda. What does church want from the government? The church wants the government to let them preach the gospel and get more people into the church. And the government has no interest in this. This is not what the government is responsible for. The government is not responsible for making your church bigger. So that's why, like, government doesn't really want to cooperate with the churches, because the church doesn't doesn't answer any needs of this community in this way, and doesn't help government to do what government is responsible for. But when the church leaders come to the government, they understand the problem in their community. They show the government, we understand that we have this many children in orphanages from our community, this many families at risk in our community. Our church is involved with doing this, this, and this. We have people trained and equipped. We can do this. When they understand this problem, we would like to help to solve this, this, and this. And now government is ready to listen. When the church speaks professional language and shows understanding and shows even higher level of expertise than the government is very open for cooperation with the church on this kind of level, not on evangelism meeting on the central street or central square, but when the church says we can help the vulnerable families and children, we can take care of them. And then the government doesn't really care whether you will preach to them or not, because like they understand that that's what the church will do naturally, but they kind of don't worry about that. But when the church doesn't understand this kind of problems of the people around them, and they come to the government and want the government to cooperate, then it's very hard to get this cooperation. So I don't know how it will work in other cultures, but this is how we saw it working in Ukraine, where the government is also very secular, with like post-communistic, and they always say that the church is separate from the state, and the problem is the church sees it's separate from the state. So that's why it's really hard sometimes for the church to see that they are part of the community, they are part of the society, they have all equal rights, and they should be part of the solution of the problem. And then it's easier to share the vision, easier to get them on board.
I'm going to probably come at this from a slightly different tact. I was really excited to see in the first plenary session where the roadmap was rolled out. And it was exciting for me because my wife and I were going to be doing a training session on PATH, which looked very, very similar to the roadways map. And PATH stands for Planning Alternative Tomorrows with Hope. And in fact, in this very room yesterday, we did a training session on how that particular training methodology can be used as an actual tool to bring people together. And it's really interesting, as I'm hearing the panelists talk, many of the words that are being used are instrumental in examining the whole solution and the whole situation. It starts by identifying what your North Star is, your vision, and establishing that through the eyes of the people that are in the group. It's not my path, it's your path, it's your vision. You move backwards in time to establish then, based on our path that's maybe 5 or 10 years in the future, what are our more immediate goals that are positive and possible in a 2 or 3 year time frame. Then you also move back again to say, okay, where are we now? And this involves a realistic look within your organization, within your community, to establish within your country what is the situation as it pertains to orphans or what other vulnerable group that you're trying to address the solution to. You move there by identifying very specifically, again, what some of the strengths are, or what you need to strengthen within your community to move forward from where you are now towards that vision that you have established. It is also critical in my view, and some people tend to avoid this, is to take a look at what are the barriers. Because I think if you fail to identify what the barriers are moving forward in whatever action you're going to be taking, you're going to miss a critical step. Do you have supportive legislation? Do you have a government that's on board? Are you working in a secular society? Are you working in a Christian society? What are those obstacles that you're going to be faced? Because once you identify those obstacles, then you can also look forward to identifying solutions. And it gets down to the very micro level where we're identifying This is our next step, the first step that we're going to do by tomorrow or next week, so that you don't have a planning session that becomes a great event and that everybody has a lot of good platitudes, but we leave the room and nothing happens. So this visual graphic tool is also really, really good for helping to serve as a reminder to the organizations and to the individuals who are part of the planning process of what our tasks are. This planning tool involved using 10 pieces of paper and a marker. So it's not a very high-tech solution, but it is one that can bring people together. It focuses on what the goals are that are established within the organization, within the community, and it gives you a path or a roadway onto how to move forward together to resolve those problems. It's not my idea. It actually was put forward by Pierpoint and Forrest in like something like the 1980s. If people are old enough, they'll remember the 80s. But it also is a situation, as I mentioned, that can be used not only with individuals. You can use this with your respective clients, you can use it with an organization, and you can use it across organizations. And to add just a couple of seconds to my timer, we did this training in Ethiopia, we've done it in India, and we've also done it in Ukraine. And in fact, we took the midnight train to Kherson. And in Kherson, we had about 60 people in the room. And of those 60 people, we actually had people with disabilities, because our topic was there on vulnerable people. Well, in Ukraine, as I understood it from talking with the nationals, there really were no people with disabilities. They didn't exist. Yet, surprise, surprise, they showed up at our sessions. And so we were able to actually start to engage in conversation with the very people who we were trying to solve problems for. We also found that there were mothers and fathers of persons with disabilities that were also in those sessions, and they had ideas and aspirations of hope. We had individuals who were working in their own agencies, and there were several of those agencies there. And guess what? They had never talked to each other. We also had representatives from the orphanages, and that was a real challenge. In fact, we were trying to share a vision, their vision, that was going to be very, very difficult to attain. And so our goal was not for 5 years, but it was for 25 years down the road. What would Ukraine look like in terms of services to persons with disabilities? And then breaking it down into smaller and smaller chunks, identifying individuals and organizations that were going to move this agenda forward. What we discovered, that there was a lot of tension. They thought this was all fantasy. But by the end of the second day, we broke them out into groups, and all of these disparate parties, some not really liking each other. The orphanage workers were afraid that you were going to steal their jobs, and they actually had an individual who was in the room who was the defectologist. Now there's a positive term. Her role within the orphanage was to try to identify what the defects were in the children that were in the orphanage. I was really reluctant to go on this trip. I got to identify that. And the reason is because Ukraine was going through revolutions and the Russians were annexing Crimea. And I'm sort of thinking to myself, what do they need a white guy from North America to come here and kind of talk to them? Well, by God's providence, he sent us there, and we were able to work with those groups. And without a word of a lie, at the end of this session with about 60 people, which is too large for a normal path planning process, we had not one, not two, not three, but 6 different paths identifying various issues that had been identified for the group that they could move together forward on in collaboration. These people that were barely talking to each other at the start of the meeting were now taking selfies around their path, and at the end of the planning session, we not only broke into song, but also into dance. Now, I've been to lots of training sessions, but that was the first time we ever had any dancing involved.
You've triggered something in my mind. Speaking about special needs, we were in a meeting, Alan and I, earlier this week, where special needs people were described as people of determination. And I thought that was so helpful, starting with the positive and starting with the possibility rather than focusing on the problem. So here's the thing. This meeting was in the Ministry of Tolerance of the United Arab Emirates. And that is how the Ministry of Tolerance in the United Arab Emirates describes people of special needs as people of determination. And that was a reminder to me, going back to your government piece, Oleg, that sometimes there are some surprises in governments. And the situation in India, or in the UAE, or in Pakistan, or in Venezuela is very different from the situation in Ukraine or the United Kingdom. But there can be surprises in governments. And we can start where we are in terms of building partnerships, building relationships. Another illustration of that for me is a partnership in economic empowerment, which I came across in East Africa just very recently. No, let me move on. I'm going to move on because we can come back to that at this time. But I just wanted to say the other lessons I've learned from Ukraine are that in this extraordinary journey you have been on, which has been an intentional learning journey, and you've spoken about how there were some things you didn't know 10 years ago and now you're learning. So your journey is evolving all the time. It's changing. It seems to me that alongside the things you have mentioned, some other key elements have been prayer together. There's been a lot of prayer together, hasn't there, in Ukraine? And also you've used media very effectively. Very effectively. So I think those have been also key parts of the success of the Ukraine story.
Thanks, Gordon. Can I illustrate just with one story from our context in the UK with Home for Good? And it reflects that I guess, reality of starting where we are, of being willing to come with a blank sheet, and of a reliance on prayer. A few years back, in the earlier part of the story with Home for Good, as God was bringing this together, there was a group of church leaders in a city in the south of the country, and they already had relationships. So they were committed to serving their city, and they had a number of initiatives where they were doing that. They had a relationship with the local authority, with the civic leaders, and they were aware that at that moment in time, the civic leaders were facing again more cuts to their budget and more challenge to addressing the needs in their city. And they met with them, as they did from time to time, and said, look, you know our heart, and you know that we love our city, and you know that our desire is to serve and to support. We recognize that you are facing these cuts, and we want you to know that we stand with you. We love and want to support, and would love to know what we could do, what one thing could we do that would make the most difference. As the civic leaders addressed this and reflected, they came back and said, well, the biggest challenge we face in terms of our budget is to meet the shortfall of foster carers. We need to find 80 more foster carers for this city alone, and the stretch and the impact on our budget is very heavy. And so the leaders went away and they prayed, and then they came back and made a commitment to the civic leaders. And they said, well, we know this is a big ask, but we pledge to find 40 families. We will find half of the need that is there. And the civic leaders were positive but bemused, because they said, don't you know how much we invest in this? Do you know how difficult this is? You know, we already, through our marketing teams, are working hard to find these foster carers, and it's very hard. But nonetheless, the leaders said, well, we make this commitment and we will take the vision back to our churches. And so as they prayed and as they journeyed and they presented the need to the churches, so the people began to step forward and respond. And over the course of 12 months, in seeking these 40 families, they actually had 70 come forward in the first 12 months who were willing to undergo the training. And in fact, within 12 months, they already had children in homes that were addressing that immediate need. And it was just an example of what God can do when we come together, when we're willing to serve, when we start with what we have, but to a degree, a blank sheet, not knowing, but we're willing to step forward. We have a big God who can do immeasurably more than we ask or imagine.
In the context of the Philippines, we looked at the status quo, at the current situation, and then we asked ourselves, as we go into collaboration, who has the most to gain and who has the most to lose. Philippines is 90% Roman Catholic, and they have cornered the market on orphanages. So they're the most threatened. And then there's a situation unique to the Philippines where government policy is to export our human resources. There is a diaspora of Filipinos. They're all over the world, working in the Middle East, in the US, in Canada, in Europe. I was surprised to be standing at a train station in Budapest, and I heard Filipinos talking. And so I approached them like, what are you doing here? We're working. In Prague, Filipinos working. And this has created a situation where there are technical orphans, because both mother and father are working overseas. And these children are left in the care of uncles and aunts and grandparents who sometimes don't care about their upbringing, but only care about the money being sent by the parents who work overseas. There's even families where siblings are being brought up by older siblings. And so in our context, it's like, as we find partners to collaborate with, how do we identify the issues and the approaches and the methods that will prevent something which is government policy already, which is contributing to a much larger social problem? And so much that we're learning from WWO has been very, very insightful, and how we can craft, the approach, how we can begin the conversation by a sector which might feel threatened, but could be our biggest partner in the future to resolve, all of these challenges that we're facing.
So do you have a questions? I guess you do. Comments? Yeah. Please.
So thank you very much. Very interesting panel, and enjoyed it. I'd like to float an untested hypothesis by you about collaboration with government. And part of that is how we frame the issue. So if we say that the issue is there are all these children who are orphans and they need a family, our primary government counterpart, in all likelihood, the lead, is going to be the Ministry of Social Welfare or the equivalent in the countries we're working in. And most of those ministries are by far the weakest. They have literally 1/10 of 1% of the national budget and not a very strong voice within government. If we frame the issue as we want children in families because children in loving and nurturing families are more likely to attend school and perform in school, well, that's the Ministry of Education. Children in loving and nurturing families are more likely to have better health status for all sorts of reasons. Of course, that's the Ministry of Health. They're also less likely to have social problems. Now we can pull in the Ministries of Justice and Interior. We're talking about a different collaboration, in a sense, that's kind of cross-sectoral and cross-ministries, and in part because we're framing the issue in a different way. So I'm wondering if you have any further thoughts about what kinds of framing or what kinds of messages work with government, not necessarily the way that I said it, but that what you're seeing is resonating, and maybe if you're seeing some resonance beyond just, say, social welfare to some of the other important sectors that you're working in.
Thank you.
Just a brief observation. Firstly, I'm glad that's on the tape, because you've answered your own question. It was really, really helpful. I'm glad you did. And but then to add that in some countries, collaboration with government will be difficult, if not impossible. But that I was struck this morning by Maran Mayer's observation. I don't know if you picked up on that, where she talked about fostering in their context in Jordan, because adoption is not a legally acceptable concept. So they've asked themselves, okay, given our legal constraints, what solutions can we find? I think that's the question we need to ask in many contexts. But your point about helping government to see how it actually, what we're contributing can save them money across the board is really, really significant observation. Thank you.
I think it's an excellent question. I think the key piece is who do you identify as your ally and partner within government? And in each country, that's going to be a different situation. I think the more people that you can get around the table, whether it's from all of the respective departments within government, the better. And then from that, you're going to find out fairly quickly who is most interested in taking this forward. It also may be a strategy where you have multiple partnerships with each of those respective agencies till you bring them on board and ensure that they have a clear understanding both of the problem and of the solution and of the benefits that are going to be accrued by their government by virtue of the work that the churches and organizations are doing.
Well, from Ukrainian experience, it's been like our goal for a long time to bring together different ministries and stakeholders. And one of the reasons is because the orphanages, all the orphanages in the country are spread between three ministries: Ministry of Social Politics, Ministry of Education, and Ministry of Healthcare, for different types of children, like babies under healthcare, children with disabilities under social politics. And Ministry of Education has the most orphanages because they had the schools. It's like they were run like boarding schools. And so what we learned is the ministries are not much interested in saving money. So like they actually are interested in spending more. So the Ministry of Education probably is the most resistant to the reform because they have the most of institutions and they get the most money for their structure. So this is not the way you kind of motivate them to change, like to cut down their budget. But what we saw, we tried to identify their roles in working with children, because usually all the social work is under the Ministry of Social Policy. But just last year we did a project with the Ministry of Healthcare where we developed a training curriculum for medical doctors, for pediatricians, to help them to identify abuse signs when they work with children. And we trained we trained 25 doctors to become trainers for medical staff, and now we have trainings going on throughout the country for medical workers, and and so that you can understand, none of them had any training on child abuse, on child neglect, and had no understanding of the science. So for them it was like eyes open, and they are really excited. We have good response. We have MOU with Ministry of Healthcare. Now with the new government, like it's interesting how it will work. But basically the doctors, like on the ground, they receive very well the training. They really want to be equipped and and they are excited that they have a role in preventing child abuse and neglect. So the same now, we've been talking about police. Police has a role. Sometimes they don't understand how to investigate abuse situation, how to respond to the abuse, to sexual abuse or other things. So it's another conversation that is going on, and we've also had conversation with the Ministry of Education and trying to, Daria, who is here, she just facilitated a meeting for Ministry of Education and some parliament members last Saturday on preschool education. And so we tried to get them all on board. And another brother of ours who is here, he just was appointed as an advisor to the Ministry of Social Politics. And so it's important, but sometimes the problem with the kind of making the government, what we learn to reform is even if you get one minister on board, it will not help you to get the others to that minister, because the ministers will not listen to the other minister. They need somebody neutral who will draw them all together. So, and it's God's blessing for us that we have our brother Nikolai, who is a board member of Ukraine Without Orphans, but is like Louis Boucher. He was appointed by the president as a representative of the president on Ukraine on children's rights. So he was able to build big collaboration in 2015 and 16 when we developed national strategy of deinstitutionalization for the country. We got all the ministries on board, all the NGOs, Christian leaders, regional government leaders, and it was combined effort, this strategy. Then it was approved by the president and cabinet, and it's been implemented. So in the same way, he is able to bring the ministries together for this conversation, what is best for the child. Because when the government tries to figure out what they will do, they think what is best for the system. And the role of Nikolai is to kind of get them to look at this from different angle. What is best for the children? Because sometimes the government think it's all the same, but it's not. And it was like another way of cooperation on regional level. Just yesterday, we had the meeting, Nikolai had the meeting of regional representatives from Ukraine Without Orphans, who were trained by him to become advisors to the governors in their regions on children's rights and child welfare. So.
Well, as much as I wish us to continue, I think that this is a lunchtime, am I right? And so thank you, everybody. And sorry?
Time for yet another meal.
Yes, and my recommendation to you is, you see who panelists are, so just invite them for a lunch and have a conversation with them. Thank you very much for listening, and I really wish for sessions like this to be 3 hours, and so I'm on my way to learn to be a better facilitator. Thank you very much for coming here.